The first Monday of autumn, at 6:41 inches the evening, Ethan Parker was wiping marinara sauce off his 5-year-old daughter's cheek when his phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen without letting go of the dish towel. The message was from his younger brother, Derek. Asterisk. Broke my wrist. Car hit a pothole. I swerved. Long story. I'm fine, but I can't make tonight. The blind date. It's at Maple and Lantern at 7:30. Her name is Claire. She's genuinely good, Ethan. Please don't let her sit there alone, thinking I'm just another guy who didn't show. Asterisk. Ethan read it twice. Then he looked at Lily, who was watching him with wide brown eyes, sauce still on her chin. Daddy, she said. You're making the thinking face. He set the phone face down on the counter. He was 36 years old, a structural engineer, a widower for 3 years. His entire life had compressed itself, quietly and without drama, into the distance between this kitchen and Lily's bedroom down the hall. Mornings were scrambled eggs and lost hair ties. Evenings were chapter books and the low hum of the dishwasher. The days came and went with a rhythm that asked nothing new of him. He was not the kind of man who went to candlelit restaurants on autumn Monday nights. He was not the kind of man who went on dates at all. But at 6:41 inches the evening, in the warm light of that kitchen, with the smell of tomatoes still in the air, Ethan Parker made the strangest decision he'd made in years. He called his neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, to ask if she could sit with Lily for 2 hours. And then he changed his shirt. Derek had always been the one who moved through the world easily. He returned phone calls the same day. He remembered the names of people he'd met once at parties. He laughed first and laughed loudest and somehow never seemed exhausting for it. He was 32, worked in commercial real estate, and treated his social life like a second career he genuinely enjoyed. Ethan was the older one who had never quite figured out how Derek made it look so effortless. When their mother used to compare them, and she had, gently, the way mothers do, she would say that Ethan thought before he spoke, and Derek spoke before he thought, and that between the two of them, she hoped they'd find some middle ground. She'd said this with love. She'd also said it with a slight tilt of exasperation that Ethan had learned to interpret over a lifetime. He hadn't thought about any of this in months. But standing in front of the bathroom mirror, knotting a tie he hadn't worn since a colleague's retirement party, it came back to him in pieces. 3 years ago, his wife, Natalie, had died of a cardiac event that no one had seen coming. She'd been 32, healthy. She jogged. She made green smoothies that smelled like lawn clippings and drank them without flinching. The cardiologist had used the word times anomaliso many times in the weeks after that. Ethan had grown to hate the word with a quiet, precise fury. Lily had been too. She didn't remember her mother. She knew Natalie through photographs and through the things Ethan told her, which he tried to make vivid without making sad. He had learned, in the years since, to carry grief the way you carry something heavy in a pack, not by pretending the weight wasn't there, but by distributing it, adjusting your stride, keeping your eyes on where you were going. He had not, in those 3 years, gone on a single date, not because he'd made a vow to himself, not because he thought it was too soon, simply because the idea had never risen above the level of noise. There were too many other things to manage, and managing them well had become its own kind of purpose. So it was with a sense of mild bewilderment that he now found himself backing his car out of the driveway at 7:05 on a Monday evening, heading into downtown Portland. He almost turned around on the Burnside Bridge. He told himself he was just being courteous, keeping a stranger from sitting alone in a restaurant thinking she'd been stood up. That was all this was. A small act of basic human decency that would last 90 minutes and cost him nothing except the lingering discomfort of a situation he had not chosen. He told himself that right up until the moment he pushed open the door of Maple and Lantern and felt the warm air move over him, cedar and candle wax and something faintly sweet and understood, somewhere beneath all that reasonableness, that he hadn't come out of courtesy. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd come. But it hadn't been courtesy. Maple and Lantern was the kind of place that understood what October wanted from an interior. The walls were dark walnut. The pendant lights were amber glass. Outside the tall windows, the street was a slow drift of red and gold leaves. The sidewalk lit by iron lampposts that had gone slightly warm with age. There were perhaps 15 tables. Soft conversation. The sound of a wine glass set down with care. Ethan stood near the host stand and felt, briefly, like a man who had wandered into someone else's life. He spotted her almost immediately. She was seated near the window at a table for two, her back partly to the room, her attention on the street outside. She wore a cream-colored sweater. Her hair brown, somewhere between chestnut and darker, was pulled back loosely, a few strands loose near her jaw. She had the posture of someone comfortable with stillness. Ethan walked over. She looked up when he was 2 steps away, and he saw the brief recalibration behind her eyes, the slight adjustment of expectation. The flickering question she didn't ask aloud. He stopped at the table. "Claire Bennett, that's me," she said. Her voice was measured, curious but not alarmed. "I'm Ethan, Derek's older brother." He paused. "He broke his wrist tonight. He asked me to come and explain in person instead of just sending a message. I'm sorry. I know this is," he gestured vaguely at the absurdity of the situation. "Not what you were expecting." Claire looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the kind of smile that happens when something lands in a way that's genuinely unexpected. Not in a bad way, but in the way that makes a person reconsider the shape of the evening. "So tonight," she said, "I'm technically on a blind date with someone's older brother." "Technically," Ethan agreed. "That's a new one." He almost apologized again. But she was already gesturing to the chair across from her. "You're already here," she said. "Sit down." The first 20 minutes were the conversational equivalent of two people testing the ice on an early winter pond. Not unpleasant, just careful. She was a Portland native, had gone to school in Olympia, come back, he was from here too, had studied engineering at Oregon State, returned for work, and stayed for reasons that had quietly rearranged themselves into reasons involving a particular woman, and then, after her, a particular daughter. He didn't say any of that yet. They talked about the neighborhood. They talked about the autumn, which had come early and sharp this year, all the warmth gone by late September. She said she liked it. The cold clarified things, she said, made the light more interesting. He agreed, though he'd never thought to describe the October light as interesting. He noticed, once she said it, that she was right. She was 34. She asked about his work in the way people asked when they were genuinely trying to understand it, not just filling silence. He explained load distribution and site logistics with more enthusiasm than he'd planned. She listened with her head tilted slightly, asking questions that suggested she was actually tracking what he was saying. In return, he asked about hers. "Art therapy," she said, "specifically with children. I work at a pediatric clinic and 1 day a week at an elementary school. That's very different from what I do," he said. "Yes," she said, without apology. "Do you like it?" She considered the question as if it deserved genuine thought rather than a reflexive yes. "I find it necessary," she said. "I don't always know if I like it. Some days the work is very hard, but I know it matters. That turns out to be enough, most of the time." Ethan felt something shift almost imperceptibly in the atmosphere at the table. He couldn't name it. It was the shift that happens when you realize the person across from you is saying something real and not something rehearsed. He ordered the salmon. She ordered the vegetable risotto. The wine was an Oregon Pinot, and she'd chosen it, which he appreciated because he would have chosen badly. He was aware, somewhere in the back of his mind, that he was more present in this conversation than he had been in any conversation in a long time. Not performing, not enduring, just there. It unsettled him in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. Midway through the main course, Claire set her fork down against the edge of her plate. Not the way people do when they've finished, but the way they do when they've decided to say something that requires both hands free. She looked at him steadily. Is there someone waiting for you at home? The question was quiet, simple, without calculation. Ethan stopped. He had a half-formed answer ready, the kind that was technically true and gave nothing away. Asterisk. No. A neighbor is watching the place. Something like that. Something that skated the surface without cracking it. He held the answer for a moment. Then he set his own fork down. My daughter, he said. She's 5. Her name is Lily. Claire didn't move. She waited. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. Cardiac event. She was 32. Lily was 2. She doesn't remember her. He paused. I tell her things, so she knows who her mother was. I try to make it. He stopped again. I try to make it something Lily can hold on to without it breaking her. The restaurant continued its soft business around them. Someone laughed at a table near the bar. The candle between them moved in a draft from somewhere. Claire said nothing for a moment. Not because she had nothing to say. He had the distinct impression she was choosing. What's her favorite thing? She asked. The stuffed rabbit, he said. She takes it everywhere. It's been through the wash so many times it's basically gray now, but she won't let me replace it. He almost smiled. She calls it Biscuit. That's a good name for a rabbit, Claire said. She also asks me about her mother sometimes, he said. At bedtime, mostly. She'll ask me something whether Natalie liked the rain or what she sounded like when she laughed. And I tell her, but there are nights when I'm sitting in the kitchen after Lily's asleep, and I realize I'm afraid I'm starting to forget the exact sound. And I don't know what to do with that. He hadn't said that to anyone before. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd said it now. Claire picked up her wine glass but didn't drink from it. She held it the way people hold something when they want their hands to have a job. You came here tonight, she said after a moment. Was that because you wanted to? Or because you thought you were supposed to? The question arrived without edge. But it landed at the center of something he hadn't examined in a long time. He sat with it. I don't know, he said honestly. Derek asked. I said yes, but I almost turned around twice on the way here. He looked at her. I think maybe both. Does that make sense? It makes complete sense, she said. She put the wine glass down. Most of us are walking around doing both at the same time, she said. The question is whether you eventually figure out which one is driving. After that, the careful ice was gone. What replaced it wasn't warmth. Exactly, it was something more like honesty, which ran cooler but lasted longer. Claire talked about her work with children who had experienced grief or trauma, not the clinical mechanics of it, but what it actually looked like. A 7-year-old who wouldn't speak but who, given a box of watercolors, produced seas of dark blue with a single orange flame in the lower corner, week after week. A 4-year-old who drew her family as a row of circles, one of them always smaller and set apart. They tell you things through images that they can't say with words, Claire said, because they don't have the words yet. Sometimes adults don't either. The images are just quieter. Ethan thought about that. Lily draws, he said. A lot. She draws our house with all the lights on, every window. Claire looked at him. He saw something cross her face that might have been recognition. That's significant, she said, carefully. I know, he said. They talked about fear not in the abstract, therapeutic way, but the specific, particular fears that arrange themselves inside a life. She talked about a relationship that had ended 2 years ago. A person she had trusted who had turned out not to merit it. Not dramatic. Just a slow erosion of honesty until she'd realized one day that she'd stopped telling him true things. I started performing okayness, she said. That's when I knew. Performing okayness, he repeated. You know what I mean. He did. He knew exactly what she meant. He had been performing okayness for 3 years in 100 small ways at work, with Derek, with Mrs. Calloway, even with himself in the bathroom mirror, and he hadn't once called it that. By the time dessert arrived, she'd ordered a small dish of pear sorbet. He declined. The evening had changed shapes entirely. It was no longer a strange accident, a substitution, a social obligation being honored at arm's length. It had become something else. He wasn't sure there was a good word for what it had become. Something beginning, or perhaps more accurately, something that might, if handled carefully and without assumption, have the conditions necessary for a beginning. He was aware enough to know those were very different things. On the sidewalk outside Maple and Lantern, the October night had gone properly cold. The street was quiet, except for the sound of leaves and, somewhere down the block, a couple walking a large dog that was investigating a lamppost with great professional seriousness. They stood facing each other. "I had a genuinely good evening," Claire said. "That's not something I say as a form." "Neither do I," he said. She looked at him directly. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "Because I think you'd prefer that to something easier." "Yes," he said. "I don't know if I'm in a place to date someone who has a child," she said. "I'm not saying that as an objection to you specifically. I'm saying it because it's true, and because it's relevant, and because you deserve to know it going in. If there is a going in." She paused. "A child changes everything about what a relationship is, what it asks of the people in it, and I haven't done that work yet, thinking about whether I'm ready for that." Ethan stood in the cold and took the honesty the way it was offered. Plainly, without hostility, without apology. "I appreciate that," he said. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I'm saying I don't know." "That's a fair thing to say." She pulled her jacket tighter. "Is it strange," she asked, "that I'd like to have coffee sometime? Without the blind date framing. Just two people who had an honest conversation and aren't quite finished with it." He thought about it. Genuinely, for a moment, thought about it. "No," he said. "It's not strange." She nodded once. They said goodnight. He walked back to his car with the cold in his coat and something new and tentative and impossible to name moving around in his chest. He texted her the next Wednesday, not immediately, not strategically, simply when it occurred to him that he'd been thinking about something she'd said about the October light, and he wanted to tell her she'd been right about it. She wrote back within the hour. They met for coffee that Saturday, at a place on Alberta Street with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and afternoon light coming in at a long diagonal across the floor. It was nothing like Maple and Lantern. The difference made things easier. They talked for 2 hours. When she left, she had a coffee ring on the sleeve of her jacket and didn't notice, and he thought about pointing it out and then didn't, and then spent the drive home wondering why he hadn't. The following week, they walked along the waterfront. The Willamette was gray under a sky that couldn't decide between clouds and sun. They bought roasted chestnuts from a cart near the Hawthorne Bridge and ate them walking, saying things they wouldn't have said sitting down. She told him about her mother, who had died when Claire was 19. A long illness, slow and patient and terrible. She said she had spent a year afterward being furious at everyone who still had their mother and wasn't paying enough attention to it. He said he understood fury of that particular shape. She said she believed him. There was an afternoon in November when she mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she'd been thinking about what he'd said about telling Lily things so she could hold on to her mother without being broken by her. She said that was an unusual level of care for how to carry a grief forward. He said he wasn't sure it was working, that sometimes Lily asked questions he didn't know how to answer without it costing him something visible, and he didn't want Lily to see him come apart at the seams over it. Claire said, "She already knows, probably. Children understand more than we show them credit for. Letting her see that it still costs you something might be one of the more honest things you can give her." He drove home that evening and put Lily to bed and sat in the kitchen for a long time, not crying exactly, but in the neighborhood of it. He thought that might have been a good thing. It was early December when Claire met Lily, not by design, exactly. It had come up in a Thursday evening phone call. Ethan mentioning that he was taking Lily to Ladd's Addition on Saturday for the rose garden. Even though the roses were long done for the year, because Lily had seen a picture of it in a library book and asked if it was real. There had been a pause, and Claire had said, "I know that garden. I used to go there when I was in college. There's a path that makes a perfect X in the middle." Another pause. "Would you want to come?" he'd asked. He had been careful. He'd thought about it for the 2 days before he asked, turning it over, checking it from different angles. Lily was not a variable to be introduced carelessly. She was the whole weight of his life, and anything that entered her orbit needed to be honest about what it was. But Claire had been honest, consistently, pointedly, without performance. That mattered. So, the garden. The three of them. Claire arrived at the garden gate carrying a paper bag. Inside the bag, a set of sidewalk chalk in 8 colors. Lily regarded the bag with the focused interest of someone conducting a preliminary appraisal. "Are those for drawing?" Lily asked. "They're for drawing on the path," Claire said. "If your dad says it's okay." Lily turned to Ethan with an expression of intense advocacy. He said it was okay. What followed was 45 minutes of Lily directing Claire in the construction of an elaborate series of flowers, animals, and one ambitious attempt at a dragon that became, through consensus, a large, friendly dog. Claire sat on the cold path without complaint, following Lily's instructions with patient, specific attention. She never talked down to her. She asked Lily questions about the drawings, what color the dog wanted to be, whether the flowers had names, and listened to the answers as if they were worth listening to. Ethan sat on a bench and watched. He'd told himself he was watching to see how Lily responded, monitoring the situation. Being a careful father, that was partially true. He was also watching because something about the scene the two of them bent over the chalk path in the winter gray garden, Lily's small hand pointing to where the dragon dog's tail should go, made him feel something that had no clean name. Something like, "The world still has this in it." He hadn't felt that in a while. On the walk back to the cars, Lily ran ahead on the path, her boots loud on the brickwork. Claire walked beside him. "She's extraordinary," Claire said, quietly. "I know," he said. He paused. "She scares me every day." "That's probably just love," she said. That night, after bath time and the chapter of the book they were halfway through and the good night to Biscuit the rabbit, Lily looked at him from the pillow with her most serious expression. "Daddy," she said, "can the chalk lady come to the garden again?" He smoothed the blanket. "Maybe," he said. "I liked her," Lily said. She said it the way children say definitive things, without qualification, without agenda, without any awareness of how heavily the sentence might land. Ethan turned off the lamp. He sat in the dark hallway for a moment, his back against the wall, Lily's door open a crack. He realized he'd been holding his breath, in some form, since the morning. In late January, Claire joined him and Lily for a Saturday dinner at the house. It was not formal. Pasta, a salad, the particular low-level chaos that accompanied all meals with Lily, who had opinions about the distribution of Parmesan. It had been going well. Then, at 8:10, Lily woke up screaming. Ethan was on his feet before he'd fully processed being awake out of his chair, down the hall, through the door. Lily was sitting up in bed, her face pressed into his shoulder before he'd finished saying her name. He knew this dream, the one where Lily was looking for something and couldn't find it. She'd never described what she was looking for in any terms that made it easy to help, but he knew. "I'm here," he said. "I've got you. You're here." He rocked her. He stayed in the low voice, the steady rhythm. After a while, the crying slowed. He could feel the small, shuddering breaths evening out. When he finally looked up, he realized Claire was standing in the doorway. She wasn't in the room. She'd stopped at the threshold, and she stood there watching, and there was nothing on her face that resembled intrusion or discomfort. She had understood, immediately and without being told, that the room belonged to the two of them. She had stayed outside it. When Lily was asleep again, Ethan came out and pulled the door mostly closed. In the kitchen, Claire had put the kettle on. She set 2 mugs on the counter. "Thank you," he said, "for staying out." "Of course," she said. She didn't elaborate. They stood with their tea in the kitchen, quiet. Then he said it. "I'm afraid," he said. "Of this?" She waited. "Not of you," he said. "Of what happens if this becomes real and then goes wrong." I know. It sounds like something a person says to protect themselves from something good, but it's not only that. He put the mug down. I know what it costs to lose someone. I know the exact texture of that. And I don't know if I can put Lily through a version of it. Or myself. Claire was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about that too." "What do you think?" he asked. She turned the mug in her hands. "I think," she said slowly, "that what you're describing isn't a reason not to do something. It's evidence that you understand what's at stake. Fear like that doesn't mean stop. It means times. Pay attention. Asterisk." She paused. "And I think the other thing is, love isn't a promise that nothing will hurt. It's just a decision to stay present anyway, to not vanish when it gets real." She put the mug down. "I'm not in the habit of vanishing." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the January rain had started against the window. He looked at her. "Okay," he said. It was not a small word, the way he said it. The following October arrived with the same sharpness as the one before it had. The light came at the same diagonal through the kitchen window in the mornings. The leaves made the same slow progress through their colors, persimmon and rust, and a deep, almost impossible gold, before the wind finished them up. Lily was 7 now. She had moved from drawing only houses to drawing elaborate scenes, cities, imaginary creatures, detailed maps of places that didn't exist, and some that did. She had explained to Ethan, seriously, that she was developing a style. He had agreed that she was. She also, now, set 3 places at the kitchen table without being asked on the evenings Claire was there. She did it with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she applied to everything, as if this arrangement had always been the arrangement, as if the table had always been designed for this. On a Saturday afternoon in October, Ethan stood in the back doorway with a mug of coffee. The yard had gone mostly yellow. Lily was doing something purposeful at the far end of it, involved in the construction of something using a stick and 2 large leaves. Her jacket was orange. She was narrating to herself in the particular undertone she used when she was deeply engaged with a project. Claire was on the back steps. She had a small sketchbook open on her knee, and she was drawing, not quickly, in the methodical way she had when she wasn't in a hurry to finish. She hadn't noticed him yet. He stood there. The yard, the light, the girl with the stick and the leaves, the woman with the sketchbook. He thought about a Monday evening in October, 2 years ago, the marinara on Lily's cheek, the buzzing phone, the strange decision to change his shirt and drive across the bridge. The almost turnarounds, the restaurant with its amber light and the woman near the window. A question. Asterisk. Is there someone waiting for you at home? Asterisk. He had almost said no. He understood now, looking at the yard, why he hadn't. It wasn't honesty exactly, though it was that too. It was something else. Some part of him that had been very still for 3 years had recognized the question as something it needed to answer truly. Not for Claire, she was a stranger then. For himself, there is someone waiting for me at home. That was the truest thing. Everything that came after the coffee, the waterfront, the chalk garden, the kitchen at midnight, the slow and careful and necessary work of learning to trust a new thing had followed from that honesty, had been made possible by it. The life he had now was not a replacement for the one he'd lost. He understood that clearly. Natalie was not replaced. She was still the photographs on the windowsill. She was still the stories he told Lily about what her mother had loved the smell after rain, the particular satisfaction of a problem solved cleanly, the way she used to laugh from the belly when something truly surprised her. Natalie was still there. The life had grown around her, the way a tree grows around something. There was room. He stepped down onto the steps. Claire looked up. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "A minute," he said. "Maybe 2. She moved slightly and he sat beside her on the step. Their shoulders touched. The coffee sent a thin curl of steam into the cold air. Lily had abandoned the stick and was now sitting in the leaves, apparently conducting a different kind of investigation. "She's going to come in covered in dirt," Claire said. "She always does," he said. A pause. "I was thinking," Claire said, "that we should take her to Lad's Addition again. The roses will be in some time in the spring." "She'd like that," he said. "I'd like it too," she said. He thought about that first night in October. He thought about how he'd almost not gone. He thought about how much would have simply not existed if he'd turned the car around. Lily shouted something from the yard, triumphant, incoherent, and held up what appeared to be a particularly notable leaf. He raised his mug in acknowledgement. She grinned and went back to work. He held the coffee and sat in the October light and thought, sometimes the things that change a life do not announce themselves. They don't arrive with ceremony or warning. They arrive as an ordinary Monday evening. A buzzing phone, an ordinary woman near a window in a restaurant, and a quiet question that turns out to be the exact right question. He had almost said no to all of it. He was very glad he hadn't.